My name is Marjorie Ellen. I am 67 years old. The morning began the way they all did, slowly, quietly, with the city outside still half asleep. Light crept through the tall windows of my row house on Pine Street, brushing across the framed blueprints on the wall. I'd drawn those lines decades ago, when I still believed every structure could be repaired with enough patience and the right foundation. I used to believe the same thing about families. I poured coffee, opened the curtains, and listened to the steady hum of Philadelphia traffic coming awake. The sound used to comfort me. Now it only reminded me how many mornings I'd spent alone. 5 years had passed since I'd heard my son's voice. Ethan had been 33 then, ambitious, clever, a dreamer who thought every success should come faster than the one before it. The silence between us began with a single argument and grew like ivy quiet. Stubborn, choking everything in its path. I sent him messages at first. Thinking of you, happy birthday. Your old room is the same if you ever want to visit. He never replied. I still checked my phone each morning out of habit. Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I scrolled back through our old thread, the one that ended with a sentence I wished I'd written differently. If this is what you need, take the time you need. I had meant it with love. He must have read it as distance. The kettle clicked off, breaking the silence. I carried my coffee to the back porch. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, and the city felt older than me, holding its breath between renovations and regrets. I looked across the narrow yard at the brick wall I'd rebuilt after a storm 15 years ago. Every brick sat exactly where I placed it, solid and straight. People crumble faster than walls. Most days, I kept myself busy with small projects, sorting old design sketches, repainting trim, volunteering at the Preservation Society. Purpose made the loneliness easier to carry. But even work couldn't disguise the hollow space where family used to be. The last photo of Ethan still hung in my study, him at 20, on the steps of his first apartment, holding a coffee mug and pretending to be grown. His smile was easy then, his hair wind-blown and dark like his father's. I should have taken it down years ago, but removing it felt like erasing him twice, so I dusted it every Sunday. The same way I polished the brass railing he once helped install. That was our last good day together before words turned sharp and pride took root. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, shaking the window glass. I returned inside, set my mug down, and glanced again at my phone lying face down on the counter. The screen stayed dark. It always did. By now, I had learned not to expect miracles. Estrangement doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows slowly, fed by hurt and misunderstanding, until even hope learns its limits. Yet some part of me still paused each time the phone buzzed with an unknown number, for a heartbeat. I imagined it might be him. That morning, it almost was. The screen lit up once, then went still again, just a wrong number, some automated reminder from the pharmacy. Still, I felt that small jolt in my chest, the reflex of a mother who hasn't stopped listening even when there's nothing left to hear. I turned the phone over, silenced it, and tried to laugh at myself. But the sound that came out was something smaller, like a breath caught between memory and surrender. Tomorrow, as it turned out, would not begin this quietly. The next morning arrived, dressed in the same gray light, quiet and predictable. Until the phone broke it, I was in the kitchen, rinsing my cup, half listening to the radio murmuring about traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway, when the ring startled me. Not the usual soft chime from the Preservation Society, or a delivery reminder. This one sounded sharper, insistent, cutting through the stillness. I dried my hands, reached for the phone, and stared at the screen. Unknown number. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail. I get plenty of spam these days, insurance pitches, surveys, wrong numbers looking for someone else. but something in me hesitated. A small pulse of recognition without logic, against my better judgment. I answered, "Hello, this is Marjorie." A pause, then a voicemail, level, unmistakably familiar, yet strangely foreign. "Dinner tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Bring money." It took me a second to place it. The tone was older, roughened around the edges, but the cadence was the same. "Ethan." I felt the world narrow to the size of that single sound. My hand gripped the counter for balance. The hum of the refrigerator, the birds outside. Even my own heartbeat seemed to fade until there was only the echo of his words. "Ethan," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. "Is that you?" "Yes. I'm hosting dinner tomorrow. You should come." The way he said it flat, mechanical, made it clear this wasn't a reconciliation, it was an arrangement. After all this time, I said softly, What is this about?" He exhaled, impatient. "We'll talk tomorrow. Just come. My address hasn't changed." Then, as if remembering something important, he added, "Bring $200,000. I straightened, the words slamming into me harder than any insult. 200,000, yes. Cash or check, doesn't matter. Just bring it. There was no tremor in his tone, no hesitation, as though he were asking me to bring dessert instead of a fortune. "Ethan," but he was already speaking over me, calm and curt. "You can afford it. I saw the car, the silver Mercedes. Congratulations. By the way, looks expensive." And before I could reply, before I could gather any part of my voice to stop him, the line clicked dead. I stood there in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow static where his voice had been. My reflection stared back from the glass cabinet door, steady eyes, pale lips, a woman who should have been used to silence by now. But this was different. Silence after cruelty feels heavier than silence after love. I set the phone down and leaned on the counter, the cool marble anchoring me. $200,000. I whispered the number out loud, as if the shape of the words might make sense of them. He'd seen the car. I had bought it only 2 months ago. After a lifetime of careful saving and indulgence, I'd told no one about except my accountant. A silver Mercedes, smooth and quiet. A small reward after decades of working with my hands and my mind. I had posted a picture of it online, just once, to share with an old colleague who asked what retirement felt like. Now I understood how he'd found out. The realization stung. In 5 years, he had ignored birthdays, holidays, the death of his father, but one photo of a car had brought him back to life. I made tea, though I didn't drink it. My hands moved automatically, boil, pour, stir, but my thoughts stayed fixed on the sound of his voice. He hadn't said my name once. Not mom, not mother, just commands. As if affection were a luxury he couldn't afford. I replayed the call in my mind until each word carved its own shape inside me. Dinner tomorrow. Bring money. Outside. The sky deepened toward afternoon, and traffic hummed like distant thunder. I sat at the kitchen table, the phone face down beside me, trying to decide whether to cry or laugh. Neither came. Instead, I reached for my planner and wrote 2 lines across tomorrow's square in neat black ink: dinner. 6 o'clock. Then, after a moment's pause, another line beneath it. Do not bring money. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again, flat, measured, asking for money as if affection could be priced by the hour. By dawn, I gave up trying and wandered into my study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paper, the way old things do when they've been left alone too long. The shelves were lined with sketchbooks and binders from my years in architecture. But what I reached for was the box on the top shelf, the one labeled Ethan. I carried it to the desk and sat down. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, a few printouts of old text messages I'd once saved, like proof of something still alive. The first photo was of him at 5, grinning with 2 missing teeth, holding a toy hammer beside his father in the backyard. His hair had fallen into his eyes, and he'd refused to cut it because he said he wanted to look like an artist. I had loved that stubbornness once. The next few were from college graduation, his first apartment, the day he introduced me to Natalie. She'd been polite, nervous, the kind of woman who measured her words. I liked her, at first. We'd had coffee together while Ethan filled out mortgage papers for their new house. I remembered the way his voice cracked when the loan officer mentioned the down payment, and how I'd stepped in without hesitation. $300,000. That was what I gave them, no contracts, no questions. I called it a gift. Though I knew it was more than that. It was faith. It was belief in his promise to build something lasting. He'd hugged me that day, said I'd changed his life. Less than 2 years later, the business collapsed. He blamed the economy, then his partners, then bad luck. I didn't mind losing the money. Not really. What broke me was how quickly he and Natalie disappeared after that. Calls went unanswered. Holidays passed in silence. The next time I saw him was 5 years ago, in my own living room, shouting about the company I sold and how unfair it was that he hadn't received more. I set the photo back into the box and rubbed the bridge of my nose. The edges of memory cut sharper when you handle them too long. On the desk. My phone lay where I'd left it the night before. Its black screen reflected my face. Older now. Harder around the eyes. I thought of the message I could send, just a few words to ask what had gone wrong between us, but stopped before unlocking it. Instead, I closed the box, slid it back onto the shelf, and straightened the stack of papers beside me. I had kept those photographs safe for decades. Maybe it was time to start protecting myself instead. The memory came back to me the way summer storms do without warning. Loud and relentless. I had tried for years to keep that day sealed in the past, buried beneath work and routine. But after his phone call, it rose again like a tide I could no longer hold back. It was 5 years ago, a humid July afternoon. My firm had just finalized the sale. I'd signed the last papers that morning. The ink still fresh on the contracts. $2 million, that was the number the papers said. Though the reality was far less glamorous. After taxes, employee pensions, back pay for contractors, and several lingering project debts, there wasn't much left. But it was enough to breathe. Enough to retire without owing anyone. I remember thinking I'd finally earned a quiet life. Ethan came by that evening without calling first. I heard the door open and his footsteps echo across the foyer before I could even stand up from the kitchen table. He'd always had a way of entering a room like it already belonged to him. "Congratulations." "Mom," he said, waving one of the news clippings he'd printed. $2 million. I saw the headline. I smiled then, naive enough to think he'd come to celebrate. "It's not quite that simple," I told him, setting down my pen. "There are obligations to clear, people to take care of first." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying me. "How much do you get to keep?" I hesitated. Not because I wanted to hide anything, but because I could already sense the tone of his question. "Enough," I said carefully. "I'm paying out what's owed. After that, I'll have enough to live comfortably." His eyes narrowed. "Comfortably? You mean without helping me?" "Ethan," I sighed. "You and Natalie already received $300,000 when you started the business. I'm proud I could do that for you. But..." He interrupted me with a laugh, sharp and humorless. $300,000 was an investment. It failed because of circumstances, not because of me. You know that. I know, I said softly, and I don't hold that against you. But that money was a gift, not a loan. I can't give more. He shook his head, pacing. So you're keeping everything for yourself. That's what this is. Greed. Just dressed up in fancy words about fairness. I stood, my heartbeat quickening. Do you have any idea what fairness has cost me? He turned, eyes bright with anger. You could change my life with a single check, and you choose not to. You always loved your projects more than your family. That last sentence hit harder than he could have known. I had spent years trying to build a business while raising him alone after his father died. Every design, every late-night deadline had been for him. I tried to steady my voice. This isn't about love or loyalty. It's about limits. He slammed his hand against the table. Limits. You think setting limits makes you noble? You're selfish. Mom, you'd rather sit on your money than help your own son. For a long moment, we just stood there, the air thick with everything we couldn't say. The newspaper article lay between us. The headline, Bold Ellen and Associates acquired in landmark deal. I finally spoke, my voice quiet but unshaking. If you see me that way, then maybe you shouldn't come here anymore. He looked stunned, as if he hadn't expected me to answer at all. Then his mouth hardened into a line. Fine, he said. Enjoy your success. Don't call me when you realize you're alone. He left, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I remember the silence afterward, the sound of it pressing against the walls. I had stood there, staring at the empty doorway, realizing too late that fairness sometimes looks like cruelty to those who only measure love by what it gives them. That was the last day he was in my house. Until now, morning light spilled through the tall windows, pale and steady. I hadn't slept much. But the exhaustion had settled into something sharper focus. The phone call still echoed faintly in my head, but the shock had cooled into thought. I made coffee, sat at my dining table, and opened my laptop. For years, I had used this same space to draw architectural plans. Each line measured, each space intentional. Now, I was sketching something different, an outline for my own protection. The first search was simple Pennsylvania estate law, then inheritance rights, adult children, then irrevocable trusts and disinheritance clauses. The language was clinical, detached. Yet the more I read, the calmer I felt. There was power in information, even the kind written in legalese. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. Anger was loud and brief. What I felt now was quieter, a cold kind of clarity that left no room for trembling hands or tears. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I wanted to make sure that what I had built every late night, every deadline, every house that bore my name would go to someone or something that understood its worth. If Ethan saw me only as a vault, then perhaps I needed to close the door and lock it gently. I began making notes. I still had the contact for my old business attorney, Margaret Chen, tucked away in a desk drawer with other remnants of the firm's final days. She'd been practical and unflinching, rare qualities in her line of work. She was the kind of woman who could turn emotion into strategy. I pulled out my checkbook, my old ledgers, the folders where I kept account summaries and property deeds. The neatness of the paper stacks steadied me. The numbers didn't judge, didn't shout, didn't vanish when the world turned cold. $300,000 gone to a failed business. $2 million earned and dissolved through obligation. Dozens of projects built from concrete and hope. All of it. The sum of a life that had value beyond what anyone could demand. As I typed, a line from one of the articles caught my eye. Testamentary freedom allows an individual to control their estate as they wish within reason and documentation. That phrase lingered within reason and documentation. Two things I'd always believed in. I wrote a list of steps. Contact Margaret. Gather statements and proof of prior gifts. Review trust options. Make decisions while calm. For the first time since his call, my breathing steadied. My heartbeat found its rhythm again, like the click of drafting tools against paper. I closed my laptop and looked around the quiet room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and determination. Ethan had taken 5 years of silence and turned it into a weapon of convenience. But I could still decide what silence meant. I didn't need to shout. I didn't even need to fight. I only needed to plan. And this time, the plan would outlast the noise. By the next morning, the plan no longer felt like an idea. It felt like a structure, something real. Something I could build piece by piece until it could stand on its own. I called Margaret Chen's office just after 9. Her receptionist still answered with the same calm, clipped tone I remembered from my business years. When I gave my name, there was a short pause, followed by the sound of keys tapping. "Ms. Chen can see you at 3 this afternoon," she said. "Will that work?" "It will," I replied, and hung up. For the next few hours, I gathered what I needed: bank statements, my old partnership contracts, the letter from the firm's acquisition, and copies of the checks I had given Ethan and Natalie years ago. Paper told the truth, even when people refused to. By the time I left the house, the leather folder in my hands felt heavier than its weight should have allowed. Margaret's office occupied the top floor of a restored brownstone near Rittenhouse Square. She had always loved details: brass handles polished to a glow, white orchids in slim vases, blinds drawn to the exact same height. When I walked in, she looked up from her desk, her expression unchanged by the 5 years since we'd last met. "Marjorie," she said, standing to shake my hand, "you look well. Retirement suits you." "It did," I said quietly, "until recently." Her gaze sharpened, not unkindly, the way a surgeon studies a patient before making the first incision. "Tell me everything." I told her about the phone call, the demand, the silence before it, and the sudden urgency after. Her pen moved across her legal pad with steady rhythm, capturing each fact without judgment. When I finished, she looked up, the faintest crease between her brows. "And you want to protect your assets," she said. "Not as a question. I want to protect my legacy." I corrected. "I don't want him to suffer. I just don't want to be used again." Margaret leaned back, her dark suit immaculate, her tone measured. "You're not the first parent to come to me with that wish. The law allows a great deal of freedom in estate planning so long as you are of sound mind and the documents are airtight." "I am," I said. "You know me well enough to know that." She smiled faintly. "I do. But we'll document it anyway. A formal evaluation of competent standard practice in cases like this. It protects you from challenges later." She drew a new page from her pad and began listing items. "You'll need a new will, witnessed and notarized. I recommend adding a no contest clause if he disputes it. He forfeits any potential inheritance. You mentioned giving him $300,000 years ago." "Yes," I said. "To start a business. It failed. Then we'll note that as a lifetime gift. That documentation alone strengthens your position. If he attempts to claim unfair treatment, the record will show otherwise." She paused, her gaze steady. "How large is your current estate?" I hesitated, then told her. "After obligations, approximately $1,800,000 in assets. The house is paid for. The rest is in diversified investments." She nodded. "Substantial, but manageable. You'll designate beneficiaries. I've been thinking about the Construction Preservation Fund. They restore historic buildings. It feels right." Margaret made another note. "That's wise. Clear intent reduces disputes." The meeting stretched over an hour, but the time passed with the efficiency of well-cut glass. Every word she spoke was deliberate, grounded. For years, I had drafted blueprints where measurements determined strength. Now, her precision gave me that same sense of structure. When we finished, she stacked her notes neatly and met my eyes. "Marjorie, what you're doing isn't cruel, it's responsible. But understand, this will end whatever illusion of reconciliation he might still hold." I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle somewhere deep. He ended that long ago. I'm only closing the door he already walked away from. Margaret extended her hand. "I'll draft the documents by tomorrow morning. You'll sign in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. Once filed, it becomes law." Her handshake was firm, grounding. "I'll also schedule the cognitive evaluation, nothing invasive, just proof you're acting rationally. It's protection, not suspicion." I thanked her and gathered my folder. The late afternoon light through the blinds painted soft gold stripes across the carpet as I left. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, people rushing to meetings, buses sighing at the curbs, a violinist playing near the square. Life went on, full of noise and movement, untouched by the quiet wars that happen inside families. I walked to my car and sat for a long moment before starting the engine. Margaret's words lingered in my mind. It becomes law for years. I had built homes for strangers, places where they could feel safe. Now, at last, I was building one for myself, not from wood or stone, but from certainty. The next morning began with a stillness that felt almost ceremonial. I dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but out of intention. A pale gray suit I hadn't worn since my last board meeting. Low heels, hair pinned neatly away from my face. If I was going to sign away my life's work, I would do it with dignity. Margaret's office smelled faintly of citrus and paper when I arrived. The conference table had been cleared except for a single neat stack of documents and a heavy brass notary embosser. Margaret stood beside it, her posture crisp as ever. "Everything's ready," she said. 5 copies, as you requested. Each will be notarized and sealed individually. You'll sign here, here, and again at the bottom of each witness page. 2 witnesses waited quietly, a young paralegal and the notary public, a silver-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands. I greeted them politely, then took my seat. Margaret slid the first document forward. "Take your time," she said softly. I read every line, though I already knew its contents by heart. "I, Marjorie Lane, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The words were formal, impersonal, yet I could feel the pulse of meaning behind them. The clauses flowed with Margaret's precision, each paragraph a small defense against chaos. My assets were listed, my wishes documented, my intentions made ironclad. If Ethan challenged this, he'd find no cracks to exploit. When I reached the line for my signature, I paused. My hand trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the gravity of permanence. Then I signed, clear and deliberate. The pen moved again and again as Margaret turned each page. When the final sheet lay before me, the notary adjusted his glasses and nodded. "Do you sign this of your own free will? Without coercion or influence, I do." I said, "Do you understand this document to be your last will and testament?" "I do." His embosser pressed into the thick paper with a soft, definitive click. I watched as the seal left its raised mark, a circular impression, faintly gleaming under the office light. There was something oddly beautiful about it, an emblem of control. We repeated the process 4 more times, the rhythm becoming steady, almost meditative. Sign, date, seal, sign, date, seal. When it was done, Margaret gathered the copies into separate envelopes, labeling each with careful strokes of ink. "One for my office," she said. "One for you. 3 for safekeeping in secure locations." I looked at the envelopes, their neat corners aligned like soldiers. 5 layers of finality, 5 barriers between love and obligation. As I reached for the one marked personal copy, I felt a calm, unlike anything in years. "Keep that one close," Margaret said. "You'll want proof in hand if anything arises." I slipped it into my leather folder and met her gaze. "One of them will come with me tomorrow night." Her brows lifted slightly. "To dinner." "Yes." She didn't press further. She knew better than to ask what I planned to do. Outside, the late afternoon sun spread over the city like soft gold. The folder rested against my arm, its weight steady, reassuring. By the time I reached my car, I already knew which envelope I would open first and which one I would deliver in person. By the next evening, I had rehearsed the drive a dozen times in my mind. The directions were the same as always, north out of the city, past the quiet curve where the old sycamores arched over the road, then into the neighborhoods that gleamed with new money. But it felt foreign now, as if I were traveling backward into a place that no longer existed. I dressed without rush or hesitation. A black silk blouse, pressed slacks, pearl earrings I hadn't worn in years. They had been a gift from Ethan's father on our 10th anniversary, simple, classic, unpretentious. They reminded me of who I used to be before every gesture turned into proof of worth. No makeup, only a touch of lipstick. I wanted to look like myself, not a woman trying to impress her son, and not one trying to apologize. Just someone who knew her own value, even if no one else did. The folder waited on the kitchen counter, the top envelope tucked neatly inside. I ran my hand over it once, feeling the faint texture of the embossed seal through the paper. Then I placed it on the passenger seat beside me, fastening it with the seatbelt, as if it were a companion. The car started with its usual quiet hum. The city thinned behind me, replaced by the manicured calm of the suburbs' lawns that looked too precise to be real. Driveways lined with identical stone planters. Porch lights, timed to perfection. I had once helped Ethan and Natalie find this neighborhood. I remembered the weekend they moved in, how proud he had sounded giving me a tour of the unfinished kitchen. How he said, "It's not much now, Mom, but give it time." I had believed him. I always did. The air cooled as dusk settled, and the light turned soft. That hour when everything looks gentle until you look closer. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside, my heartbeat had its own rhythm measured. Certain. Final. I turned onto their street. The house stood out even among its neighbors. Bigger than I remembered. 2 stories. White shutters. A wraparound porch with flower boxes full of yellow mums. Every detail screamed presentation. Ethan had always cared about appearances. But this felt like a stage. I parked at the curb, engine off, but didn't move right away. The envelope rested quietly beside me, pale against the dark leather. I imagined the sound it would make when I set it on their dinner table, the soft thud of paper carrying weight heavier than any currency. A porch light flicked on before I reached the door. They were watching. Ethan opened it before I could knock. Smiling too broadly, his shirt crisp, his voice bright. "Mom!" "You made it." He leaned in for a hug that barely touched, the kind that performed affection for whoever might be watching. Natalie appeared a moment later, her hair perfect, her expression neutral. "Marjorie," she said smoothly, "you look lovely. Come in." The smell of roasted meat and candle wax filled the air. Rich but artificial, like a scene prepared for a photograph. "Dinner's just about ready," Ethan said, gesturing toward the table. "We wanted tonight to feel special." I smiled faintly, stepping inside, my heels silent on the polished floor. The envelope stayed in my hand. "Special," I echoed. "Yes, it will be." As I sat down, I placed it beside my plate, angled perfectly between the silverware and the folded napkin. None of them noticed the seal. Not yet. Outside, the last light faded from the windows, and the room glowed with its careful warmth. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for the first performance to begin. Dinner began like theater, every movement rehearsed, every smile timed to land exactly when needed. Ethan poured the wine with an exaggerated flourish. Filling my glass nearly to the rim, Natalie set the platters down one by one, her bracelets clinking like nervous punctuation. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," I said. Settling into my chair, Ethan smiled too wide, too quick. "Of course we did. It's been too long, Mom. We wanted tonight to be nice." The word hung there, flimsy as tissue paper. The table gleamed under soft light candles in crystal holders. Linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. Food plated to impress roasted lamb. Asparagus in lemon butter. Tiny golden potatoes dusted with herbs. It looked like something from a magazine. But the air had an undertone, like something metallic beneath the perfume. They asked about my house, about retirement, about how it felt to be free of work. Ethan listened with the patience of someone waiting for his turn to speak. Finally, he leaned back and set down his fork. "Actually, Mom," he said, tone shifting, "there's something I wanted to run by you. A new opportunity came up, something with real potential." Natalie's hand rested lightly on his wrist. Her cue to enter. "It's a small investment project," she said. Her voice practiced. "Real estate, mostly. A friend of ours is building new developments near the Delaware River. The returns are almost guaranteed." Ethan nodded. "We're talking 18 to 20% annually, conservative numbers. But the entry's steep. We'd need capital quickly to secure our position." He looked at me then, not the way a son looks at a mother, but the way a salesman measures a prospect. "We thought you might want in. It's the kind of long-term investment that would keep everything in the family." There it was finally said out loud. I took a sip of wine, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch. "How much are you looking for?" Ethan's eyes brightened. "Just $200,000 to start." "We'd draw up the papers." "Of course. Everything official." I set my glass down gently. 200,000, I repeated. "The same number you mentioned on the phone." He hesitated for a fraction of a second before recovering his smile. "Coincidence? I guess." "Of course." Natalie leaned forward, her tone warming. "We know you've done well, Marjorie. The Mercedes looks incredible. You deserve that kind of comfort. And this project, it's not just about money, Desas. It's about legacy. Family legacy." Her words were honey poured over rust. I reached for the envelope beside my plate, the one I had carried like a heartbeat all evening. Without ceremony, I slid it across the table between the flickering candles. Ethan blinked. "What's this?" "Something I wanted to bring tonight," I said calmly. "Since you mentioned family legacy." He picked it up, confused, glancing at the seal. The faint embossing caught the candlelight. He tore it open, pulling out the papers with a rustle that seemed louder than any of us expected. As his eyes scanned the first page, his posture changed. His face, once so confidently arranged, began to harden, line by line. "What is this?" His voice was thin now. "A will." "Yes," I said. "My will." Natalie's fork slipped against her plate with a small, sharp sound. Ethan flipped through the pages, reading faster now, until the color drained from his face. "You're not serious." "I am." I said evenly, "You're not in it." He froze, as if the words didn't quite compute. "Not in it," he repeated. "You mean, I mean what I said." My voice stayed calm, quieter than his but firmer. "Everything I've built will go to the Construction Preservation Fund. They value the kind of work that lasts." His hand tightened on the papers. "You're cutting me out. After everything I've done for you." I met his gaze. "After everything I gave you, yes. $300,000 to start a business you abandoned. 5 years of silence. And now, a dinner invitation with a price tag. Natalie tried to speak, her voice trembling. You can't. This isn't fair. Fair. I turned to her. Fair would have been honesty, gratitude. A phone call that wasn't about money. Ethan pushed his chair back, the legs scraping hard against the floor. You're out of your mind, he said. People don't do this to their own children. I didn't do this, I said quietly. You did. For a moment. None of us moved. The only sound was the low crackle of the candles. Then I stood, gathering my purse, my calm intact. You wanted to talk about legacy. Now you know mine. I walked toward the door, my steps slow, deliberate. Behind me, I heard the first sharp edge of his voice, then Natalie's choked reply, then nothing. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and smoke. I took one long breath and felt, for the first time in years, the weight of my name returned to me unshared, unclaimed, wholly mine. The next morning began before the sun. My phone's vibrations stirred me from sleep, a low, steady hum that refused to stop. I reached for it with a sigh, expecting a delivery alert or maybe a reminder from the bank. Instead, the screen lit up with a flood of missed calls. Ethan, 7 calls in a row, then 4 from an unknown number. 2 voicemails. My chest tightened, but not from surprise. This, too, I had anticipated. I brewed coffee, steadying my hands as the dark liquid filled the cup. The storm outside hadn't started yet, but it was coming. I could feel it in the air, that thick, electric stillness before the first strike. The voicemails played one after another. Mom, what the hell was that last night? His voice was strained, sharp with disbelief. You embarrassed me in my own home. The next one was colder. Clipped. If you think you can just cut me out like that, you're wrong. We'll see what a lawyer says. The final one came from Natalie. Her voice trembled, half angry, half pleading. You don't understand what you're doing. Ethan's not thinking straight. Please, call us before this goes too far. I set the phone down and took a long sip of coffee. My pulse had steadied again. Their voices couldn't shake me anymore. By mid-morning, the knocks started hard, fast, relentless. Through the front window, I saw Ethan's car in the driveway, parked crooked across the edge of my lawn. He stood outside in the cold March wind, coat unbuttoned, face flushed with fury. Mom, open the door. I didn't. He pounded again, shouting now. You think you can humiliate me and just hide in there from next door? I noticed movement, a figure stepping out onto his porch. Danny Morrison. Danny had lived 2 houses down since before Ethan left for college. A retired police officer. Quiet and kind. The sort of man who trimmed his hedges at sunrise and waved to everyone without asking for anything in return. He walked slowly toward Ethan, his voice calm but firm. Morning, Ethan. You need to lower your voice. This isn't how to handle family business. This is between me and her. Ethan shouted back. She's lost her mind. Danny didn't flinch. Maybe so. But this is still her property. You're trespassing. I opened the curtain just enough to see. Phone already recording from the windowsill. Ethan's voice carried across the yard accusations. Threats. The word lawyer spat out like venom. Danny, I called softly through the door. It's fine. I've got this. He turned, catching my eyes through the glass. You want me to call anyone? Not yet, I said. Ethan's face turned toward the window. You're recording me, really? You think that's going to save you? It's not about saving myself, I said evenly. It's about remembering who you've become. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind, Then he shook his head, furious, and marched back to his car. Gravel spat from the tires as he backed out. Too fast. Danny waited until the engine noise faded. Then he approached my porch. "You handled that right," he said. "Document everything. It'll matter later." "I already have," I replied. He nodded, his weathered face softening. "I've seen a lot of family fights. They always think shouting wins the argument. But paper and patience, that's what holds up in the end." After he left, I saved the video to my computer, labeling it with the date and time. Then I forwarded the file to Margaret with a short note. "He's escalating. I'm fine." Outside, clouds gathered heavy and dark. The first raindrops hit the porch light as I watched from the window, the reflection of my face faint in the glass. I thought about how silence used to mean defeat. Now, it was armor. When the rain began in earnest, I turned off my phone, set the mug in the sink, and let the storm wash through the morning. The letter from Ethan's lawyer arrived 3 days later. Heavy with arrogance and legal phrasing, the words bled contempt through the paper. Emotional instability, diminished capacity, undue influence. In short, they were claiming I was unfit to make my own decisions. I read it twice, then folded it neatly back into the envelope. The insult didn't sting the way it might have once. It simply confirmed what I already knew, that he couldn't argue with my choices, so he'd try to argue with my sanity. Margaret called the next morning. "We expected this," she said calmly. "They'll push for a competency challenge. Let's make sure we shut that door before they can open it." How, I asked. "With evidence," she replied. "You'll take 2 evaluations, a medical exam with your physician and a psychological assessment with a certified clinician. Once we have the reports, his claims collapse. The tests were arranged within 48 hours. Dr. Stevens, my physician for over 15 years, greeted me with a faint smile and his usual crisp white coat. Margaret filled me in. He said, "Let's get this nonsense behind us." He ran me through every standard check: blood pressure, reflexes, memory recall, reasoning puzzles. At one point, he asked, "Spell world backward." I almost laughed. "Do you want it alphabetically too?" He smiled, shaking his head. After the exam, he sat across from me, tapping his pen thoughtfully. "Marjorie, you're sharper than most 40-year-olds I see in this office. If your son wants to challenge that, he'll lose." The next day came the psychological evaluation. Dr. Patel's office was small, quiet, with walls lined by shelves of heavy books. She was patient, methodical, her voice even but kind. "Walk me through your decision-making," she said, notebook poised. "Why did you change your will?" "Because my son stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as a resource." I said, "I wanted to protect what I built, not from him, but from what greed turned him into." She nodded slowly, jotting notes. "Do you feel angry?" "Not angry," I said. "Resolved." The questions continued: abstract reasoning, short-term memory tests, emotional stability assessments. I answered them all without hesitation. When it ended, she set her pen down and looked at me for a long, thoughtful moment. "Marjorie, you're exceptionally lucid," she said. "Grounded, logical, emotionally coherent. I'll write that in my report." By the time I walked out into the afternoon light, the air smelled like rain and lilacs, sharp and clean. I didn't feel vindicated, just steady, as if the noise around me had finally quieted. Margaret called that evening. "Both reports are flawless," she said. "You've not only proven competence, you've set a legal record of it. They can't touch your will now." "Good," I said. "Then let them talk. I'm done defending myself." I poured a glass of water and looked out across my yard, the porch light glowing faintly against the dusk. Proof, I realized, isn't always for others. Sometimes it's for yourself to remind you that your strength was never up for debate. Margaret's office looked different that morning, brighter, almost tranquil. The winter light slanted across the conference table, reflecting faintly off the glass-framed degrees behind her. Papers were stacked in careful symmetry, a precision that always seemed to mirror her mind. "This," she said, placing a thick folder in front of me, "is the irrevocable trust agreement. Once it's executed and notarized, the assets are no longer part of your estate. They can't be contested, seized, or reversed. Not by Ethan, not by anyone." I traced the edge of the folder with one finger. The words irrevocable trust felt heavy and final, yet strangely liberating. "How much will go into it?" I asked. Though we'd discussed it before. $500,000, she replied. "Transferred directly into the Philadelphia Architecture Preservation Fund. It's a registered nonprofit, transparent, and locally operated. They restore historic structures, schools, bridges, the kinds of places that tell a city who it used to be." I nodded. "Good. That feels right." Margaret's tone softened. "You spent your life building structures that lasted. This ensures your legacy does the same." The notary, a quiet woman named Elise, entered and took her seat at the far end of the table. Margaret adjusted her glasses, flipping to the signature page. "Before we proceed, I want you to understand the permanence of this. Once signed, you cannot retrieve those funds. You relinquish control completely." "Are you certain I am?" I said. "I'd rather the money rebuild a roof or a foundation than repair a relationship that no longer exists." She studied me for a long moment, then smiled faintly, the kind of expression that meant respect, not pity. "Then let's begin." The room fell silent except for the soft rustle of papers. I signed each page with slow, deliberate strokes, the ink steady under my hand. My penmanship looked the same as it always had measured, architectural, almost clinical. Elise moved closer, watching as I wrote. "I'll affix the seal after your final signature," she said gently. Her voice was calm, practiced, like someone who'd witnessed countless moments of quiet finality. When it was done, Margaret turned the folder toward Elise, who lifted the embosser and pressed it firmly into the page. The metallic click echoed softly in the still room. "There," Margaret said. "It's official." She closed the folder and slid it toward me. "Would you like to keep a copy?" "Yes," I said, tucking the single notarized document into my leather portfolio. The rest would stay in her office, filed and recorded with the city. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that settles after something irrevocable has been set in motion. Margaret finally broke it. "How are you feeling?" I thought for a moment before answering. "Lighter," I said, like I've stopped holding my breath. Outside her window, Philadelphia moved at its usual rhythm, traffic rolling along Walnut Street, a vendor pushing his cart, pigeons scattering at the sound of horns. Life carried on, indifferent to legal acts that changed everything for one person and nothing for the rest of the world. Margaret gathered her notes. "You've done something most people can't," she said quietly. "You've chosen meaning over legacy. That's not weakness. Marjorie, that's conviction." I smiled faintly. "Conviction was never my problem. Hope was." She gave a small nod, understanding more than she said aloud. When I stepped out into the cold afternoon air, the city looked sharper than usual, its edges defined. The trust papers rested securely in my portfolio. $500,000 committed to preservation, to beauty, to something permanent. The sum wasn't just money, it was 5 decades of work condensed into gratitude. Every line I had drawn, every design I had fought for, every moment I'd stayed late to fix what others abandoned, all of it was now part of the city's bones. I passed by one of my old projects on the walk back to my car, the red brick schoolhouse on Chestnut Street. The windows still caught the light the way I'd planned them to all those years ago. Children's laughter drifted faintly through the air, echoing against the walls I once sketched into existence. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Ethan could hire lawyers, file petitions, send threats, but the heart of my legacy had already left his reach. Inside the car, I opened my portfolio one last time and touched the embossed seal. It was cool under my fingertips, like stone after rain. The money was gone, yes, but in its place, something unbreakable remained, a truth he couldn't rewrite, a gift he could never claim. When I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back didn't look defeated. She looked decided, and that, I realized was the difference between loss and freedom. The decision to go public came quietly. No impulse, no revenge, just the calm understanding that silence had served its time. That morning, I sat at my desk with the trust papers still neatly stacked beside my laptop. The news of Ethan's lawsuit had already reached the neighborhood. A few old colleagues had written with hesitant sympathy, others with veiled curiosity. They wanted to know if it was true, if my own son was suing me for disinheriting him. I stared at the empty postbox on the community website, the one where people usually shared lost dogs, gardening tips, and charity drives. It wasn't the place for scandal. That was why I chose it. My fingers hovered for a moment, then I began to type. Families are built on respect, not entitlement. I have no interest in conflict or revenge. I only want peace, and to ensure what I've built supports others who value it. I hope those who know me understand that truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it only needs to stand. I read it once more before hitting post. No names, no accusations, no bitterness, just clarity. Within minutes, notifications began to appear. The first few were private messages. You did the right thing, Marjorie, proud of your strength. He'll see what he's lost someday. By afternoon, the post had made its quiet rounds through the neighborhood and beyond. A retired architect I hadn't spoken to in years left a comment. I remember your first design downtown. You always built with integrity. Keep doing that. For every whisper Ethan and Natalie had planted, a counterweight now existed, something steady and transparent. Margaret called that evening. You've started quite a conversation, she said, her tone carrying the faintest trace of amusement. I didn't mean to. I said, I just wanted to stop being the villain in someone else's story. You did more than that, she replied. You gave people permission to believe in their own boundaries. I thanked her, and when the call ended, I let myself exhale for the first time all day. The air inside the house felt lighter, the kind that follows a storm finally spent. That night, I went for a walk along the quiet block. A few neighbors waved from their porches, others simply nodded. Their gestures soft but knowing. No one asked for details. They didn't need to. The story had already begun to settle like dust after a collapse. When I returned home, I poured tea and sat by the window. The city glimmered in the distance. And somewhere among those lights was the building that would soon bear my name, funded by the trust now beyond anyone's reach. My phone buzzed once more. Another message from someone I didn't know. Thank you for saying what many of us are too afraid to admit. Respect matters more than blood. I read it twice, then turned off the screen. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel like isolation. It felt like acknowledgement, soft, collective, and real. And somewhere deep inside, the noise that had haunted me for years finally began to fade. It happened on a Tuesday morning, gray and unremarkable, the kind of day that hides its turning points beneath the ordinary. My phone rang just as I was rinsing the breakfast dishes. The number was familiar. Mom Ethan's voice was softer than I remembered. I stood still, the water still running. Yes, I've been thinking. he said. There was a practiced pause, as though he'd rehearsed sincerity. I shouldn't have lost my temper. You didn't deserve that. Can we talk? I didn't answer immediately. The sound of rain began tapping against the kitchen window. Just coffee, he added quickly. Nothing heavy. I'll meet you anywhere you like. Something in his tone, the carefully measured calm, told me what this was. Still, I agreed. 11 o'clock, Hanover Cafe. When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window. The face looking back wasn't angry. It was prepared. Before leaving, I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and opened the recording app, setting it to start automatically when the screen locked. Margaret had once told me, documentation doesn't mean distrust. It means self-respect. Hanover Cafe was quiet when I arrived. A few regulars scattered by the windows, the smell of roasted beans and old wood filling the air. I chose a small corner table, one where my phone could rest between the sugar jar and my cup without drawing attention. Ethan entered 5 minutes later, wearing the same coat I had bought him for his 35th birthday. The sight of it twisted something in me, a reminder of love that once felt simple. He smiled as he sat down. You look good, Mom. So do you. I said, coffee. He nodded, and I waved to the waiter. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the low hum of conversation from other tables. Finally, he sighed. I miss this, he said. Just talking. I made mistakes. I watched him carefully. His eyes were damp, or maybe just tired. For a brief second, I almost wanted to believe him, but then he continued. I'm trying to fix things. You know, the business folded, the house well. We're behind on payments. Natalie's been sick on and off. It's just been a lot. There it was, the slow pivot. The real reason for the call? I'm sorry to hear that, I said quietly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I hate to ask, but if you could help me just get stable again, $200,000, maybe it would make all the difference. I'd pay you back once things turn around. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed calm. 200,000, I repeated. That's quite specific. It's just to clear a few things. He said quickly, it's not charity. Mom, it's family. You have it. And I'd never ask if I wasn't desperate. I took a slow sip of coffee. You're right about one thing, I said. I do have it. But you're wrong about what family means. He blinked, confused. I leaned in just slightly. Family isn't a transaction, Ethan, and love isn't a loan. The words landed softly, almost kindly, but they struck something inside him. His mouth tightened. So that's it. You're just done with me. I'm done being treated like a bank, I said. He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a scrape. A few heads turned. Unbelievable, he muttered. After everything, I finished for him. I still hoped this conversation would be different. He shook his head and walked out, the cafe door slamming behind him. I let the silence return before unlocking my phone. The recording timer glowed red. 23 minutes. Crystal clear. Every word preserved. I sat for a long time, the coffee cooling between my hands. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the light had shifted, gentle and cold. Proof, I realized, wasn't just about law anymore. It was about closure. And this time, I had both. The meeting took place in a conference room downtown Neutral Ground, the kind with cold air and too much glass. I arrived early, accompanied by Margaret, who carried a single leather folder under her arm. She looked immaculate as always, every movement measured, every gesture deliberate. Across the table sat Ethan, his jaw tense, his tie slightly crooked. Natalie was beside him, pale and rigid, eyes fixed on the table rather than me. Their attorney, a man named Kirkland with polished shoes and a voice too smooth, gave me a thin smile. Mrs. Lane, he began. My clients believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding your estate planning. They're willing to discuss terms that Margaret interrupted before he could finish. There's no misunderstanding, she said evenly. Only a pattern of manipulation and unfounded accusation. And we're here to end it. She opened the folder and began to lay out the documents one by one, her tone crisp, professional, unshaken. First, she said, sliding a stack toward Kirkland. Medical and psychological evaluations confirming Ms. Lane's full mental competence. Conducted by 2 licensed professionals, both with over 20 years of experience. Kirkland adjusted his glasses, but said nothing. Ethan's gaze flicked toward the papers, then away. Second, Margaret continued, placing another document on the table. The executed irrevocable trust. $500,000 permanently transferred to the Philadelphia Architecture Preservation Fund, filed, notarized, and registered with the state. Beyond contestation, the air in the room shifted. Even Kirkland's voice faltered slightly as he asked. And the remaining assets, Margaret didn't blink, handled under the terms of her will, which, as you'll see, was signed voluntarily and witnessed by 2 impartial parties. Then, she reached into the folder and drew out a small silver device. And finally, she said, pressing a button. The matter of attempted coercion. Ethan's head jerked up. What is that? An audio recording, Margaret said simply. Taken at Hanover Cafe last week, 23 minutes long. It documents your client requesting $200,000 from Ms. Lane under the guise of reconciliation. The room went utterly still as his voice filled the air, his words exact. Unmistakable, desperate. $200,000. Maybe it would make all the difference. Natalie's face went white. Kirkland's pen froze midair. When the clip ended, the silence was absolute. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression collapsing. You were recording me, he muttered. Margaret's tone didn't soften. She was protecting herself. Kirkland exhaled, set his pen down, and straightened the pile of papers in front of him. This case, he said carefully, has no legal standing. I'll be withdrawing as counsel effective immediately. He rose, nodded politely to Margaret, and left without looking at Ethan. Natalie buried her face in her hands. Ethan's voice cracked. Mom, please, I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. You made your choice, I said quietly. And I made mine. Then I gathered my coat and stood. Margaret followed me out, her hand resting briefly on my arm in quiet solidarity. Outside, the air was bright and cold. The sky washed clean after morning rain. I didn't look back as the glass doors closed behind me. Some endings, I realized, don't need noise. They end themselves. Ethan caught up to me in the lobby before I reached the exit. His footsteps echoed against the marble. Hurried, uneven. Mom, he said, his voice rough around the edges. Please just wait. I turned slowly. The man standing in front of me wasn't the child I once carried through thunderstorms or the young architect who'd once shown me his first blueprints with trembling pride. This was someone older, worn down by choices that had chased their own reflections too long. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He said, the lawsuit. The shouting. Natalie pushed it. But it's my fault. I was angry. I thought you were cutting me out of your life. I met his gaze, quiet, but steady. You made it about money. Ethan, I never did. His mouth opened, then closed again. I know. I just thought if I could get something back. Something back, I said softly. What you wanted wasn't something you lost. It was something I built. And love doesn't live inside what's owed. He looked away. Shame flickering through his expression. I thought you'd understand. I do. I said, that's why it hurts. For a moment. The silence between us felt like the ghost of all the years we'd wasted every missed call, every half-hearted birthday message, every quiet evening where I told myself he'd come around. His eyes shone, red at the edges. Can't we start over? I wanted to say yes. The mother in me always would, but the woman standing there, the one who'd spent her life rebuilding, knew better. Starting over doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. I said, love can't survive as currency. Ethan, it needs truth to live, not debt. He nodded faintly, as though the words landed somewhere he wasn't ready to face. Then he whispered, I'm sorry, and turned away. I watched him leave without anger, only the kind of sadness that carries its own grace. Some endings, I realized, are merciful because they don't demand closure, they just release you. The drive home was quiet. The city lights passed in soft blurs, rain still clinging to the windshield. When I reached my street, I turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel. I didn't feel victorious, only hollow in the way grief feels when it's finally clean. Not guilt, just the ache of something that had already died years before. I stepped out into the cold evening, breathing in the sharp air, and walked toward the glow of my porch light, the one I had left burning, not for waiting, but for peace, but for spring came slowly that year, tender and deliberate, like something learning how to breathe again. Months had passed since the court meeting. Since Ethan's apology that never reached resolution, the noise had faded. What remained was quiet, steady, patient quiet. One afternoon, I drove across town to the old St. Bridget's Church, now under restoration by the Philadelphia Architecture Preservation Fund. The trust plaque bore my name in small, discreet letters, in honor of the spaces that hold us when words cannot. Students worked along the facade, their hands steady as they brushed away centuries of soot. Their laughter echoed through the courtyard, light and unburdened. Watching them, I felt something shift, not triumph, not even pride, but a calm recognition that something I'd built was finding its way forward without me. One of the students, a girl with a streak of white paint on her cheek, waved to me. It's holding beautifully. Ma'am, she said, the structure's stronger than it looks. I smiled. That's how most things worth saving are. By dusk, the sky turned the color of pewter. I drove home with the windows cracked, the air smelling faintly of dust and lilacs. When I reached the house, I paused at the porch. The old light fixture, wired decades ago by my late husband's careful hands, waited above the steps. For years, I had turned it on out of habit, a small gesture of waiting. That night, I switched it on once more. The bulb glowed softly against the siding, warm and unhurried. This light isn't for waiting anymore, I whispered. It's for peace, so... And for the first time in years, the quiet that followed didn't ache. It simply stayed.